Hello, I'm Robert Perry. I have some good news for you. Somewhat. I realized 24 hours ago our president dropped a lot of bad news on the country. Some of us hadn't anticipated those numbers. Others of us actually had. I released a video 6 days ago to try to help people understand that the numbers we were hearing on a nightly basis weren't quite as shocking as they sounded, and to help people understand that the data was moving in a somewhat predictable way, at least in the short term. Because I did that, I now have a context to show that we've actually improved. Not in terms of absolute numbers, but in terms of changing how those numbers change on a daily basis. Now, I realize this video is dry. I'm not in practice at making videos on communicating pandemic data, and quite frankly, I don't want to be. So please just bear with me and try to understand that I'm doing the best I can to communicate what I see in the data, because I think I see some hope where others do not. Now, if you saw the original, I'm going to help you out by telling you where to jump to. If you've not seen the original, you probably want to watch it to gain context, not only about the data, but also in regard to who I am. It'll help you understand that I'm not the sort of person who's going to feed you good news where good news doesn't exist. But in this case, if you know where to look, it really does.
Hello, I'm Robert Perry, and this is not a political video. I'm making this video today because I know some of us are scared to death by these numbers we're hearing on a daily basis. I also hear them. They make me nervous too. They're not good numbers. This video isn't about making what was bad numbers into good numbers. I wouldn't even want to try to do that. However, there is something I feel I can do to help. I can help people understand how shocking these numbers aren't as we hear them from day to day. I want to help people understand a bit more about why these numbers act the way they do. I also want to help people understand why we should not yet expect to be getting better news, why these numbers should not yet be turning into good numbers yet. Finally, I want to close the loop and revisit how our actions as a whole will impact the numbers we hear.
Every day, we see or hear a new number for the number of people infected. Every day the number grows, and every day the number feels like a surprise. And it leaves us wondering what it'll be tomorrow. By the time you see this, you probably already know what the number is. But as I'm making this, I do not. Am I going to guess? Actually, I am. But first, I'm going to tell you why I shouldn't, and I'm going to explain to you why leadership shouldn't. These aren't numbers I advocate people trying to predict. I'm just trying to give you a feel for why we shouldn't be surprised. And I can't do that, honestly, if I don't at least hazard a guess. So we'll see how wrong I am, but at least maybe it'll help you see that you can have some understanding of what to expect, even though we don't really know. Let's jump straight into the belly of the beast. And for me, the belly of the beast is cv19info.live/US. That's where I go to look at the US numbers. Usually sometime in the evening, my father calls me and is rather excited about whatever number's been reported, and I completely empathize with that. But at the same time, if you look at this curve, you can see there's a certain smoothness to it. We feel like we should be able to predict where these numbers are. But there's a trick to that. This is what's called an exponential curve. And humans are actually miserable at understanding where exponential curves are going to go. It just doesn't work well with our instincts somehow, which is why most of us need to switch to a log scale. This is used a lot in finance and pretty much any place where you need to understand exponential curves. And what this does is it makes the curve into a line. So we can see right away here we're getting into this nice little straight stretch. And even though there's an encouraging little dip down at the end right here, I hope that pans out, but we can also see one here. So are we bending down, or is this just kind of a random blip? It's hard to say, but if we look at this longer pattern, we kind of feel like we know where we're going to be when we're around here. When we're out this far, we're going to be between here and maybe here if things go really astonishingly well, we think. But we know basically, or we feel like we know basically where we're going to be. You can also, by the way, see that same thing for the recovery rate and for the death rate. And I want to pivot for a moment to talk about why this recovery rate isn't as discouraging as it looks, and why we shouldn't really be seeing improvement yet. So a lot of people point out to me how bad our recovery rate looks right now. And they especially focus on the fact that recovered is lower than the number of deaths. So the thing I want to remind you about is it takes longer to recover. I mean, I don't have good hard numbers on that, and I wish I did. I actually did go looking for a little bit, but and I'm no virologist. I'm just sort of relying on our common experience here. Is most of us have been ill, and we know we get well sometime after we are at our worst. So I'm imagining that you're going to take longer to go through the full process and recover than you do to expire. And I hate to put it so coldly, but I suspect that some of those who are most susceptible may succumb even a good deal faster than those who recover reach their worst point. So what does that mean on the exponential curve, though? So we're still looking at the log scale here, but that's useful for this, is people get concerned about, let me switch to linear for a moment. When you are looking at recovered, it looks so very, very small compared to the total infected. But if you look at recovered in relation to how many were ill some period of time ago, like 2 weeks before, so we go to March 10th. And March 10th, there were 924 people infected. Well, to be recovered, they're basically saying you're shedding no virus anymore, 2 concurrent negative tests. And I get the impression it takes a while. I had 3 to 4 weeks in my mind, but I can show you why that isn't possibly the average very quickly, because we have 394 recovered. And if you go back, and that's on the 25th, if you go back 3 weeks to March 4th, we only had 133 infected. So it's sometime between this period of time that most of these people probably got ill. And just to drive that home a little bit more, this number looks small here, but you compare it to what was going on the 4th, almost nothing was going on the 4th. So that's why I'm not as discouraged by the recovered number as a lot of people seem to be. The next thing I'm going to address is why we shouldn't be discouraged that we've not seen change yet. And this has been covered on the news, but I wanted to cover it a little more visually. We keep hearing from different sources that the numbers we're seeing now were already baked in 10 to 14 days ago. So if you change something today, you expect to see the results in the data in 10 to 14 days. So let's see what that looks like. So on March 11th, Trump banned European Union to US travel. And the only part of that's interesting is it's a memorable event, even though it seems like it was forever ago, and it happened on March 11th. This was also, by the way, when I felt like people started maybe getting a little serious about social distancing. So let's look at what 10 to 14 days actually means. I created this little thing I'm calling my 10 to 14 day stick. And basically we go over 10 days and we start with this blue line. So somewhere in this blue section, that's when we would hope for this line to dip. Again, we're on our log scale, so what's really interesting is the slope of the line. And we can see, and indeed, it does dip just a little, but reminder, we've also seen things like that here. Is it spurious data? I don't know. But that thing that felt like it was so long ago, we're only now getting to the end of when it could have impact. So let's look at some of the more aggressive events. California sheltered in place on March 19th. I checked this personally because I was doing a software deployment with someone who lives in California, and he stepped away from his machine for a few minutes and he returned to me saying, "Hey dude, your state's sheltering in place." It's a rather memorable event to let somebody know what's going on in their state on that scale. Look at this. We add our 10 to 14 day stick. There's almost no chance for us to see an improvement in these numbers due to California doing shelter in place. So let's do one more. 1 in 3 US citizens, sorry, that white on white's hard. 1 in 3 US citizens are sheltered in place on March 23rd. I believe I grabbed that from the New York Times. So let's look at our 10 to 14 day stick and look how far we are out here that we're expecting results. So this isn't supposed to have dipped yet. What I would realistically expect is I would realistically expect this line to just keep going the way it is till one of those last two things. We would maybe expect to see it start dipping here in a serious way or dipping here in a serious way. But if on whatever day this is, I'm sorry I didn't do the math, on whatever day this is, that would be the 19th plus 10, so the 29th. If on the 29th we have just continued marching up this line on the log scale the same way we have been, that's not even news. That's just what we expect. That, for all practical purposes, has already happened. Now, maybe not. Maybe just with our regular social distancing before we started locking down states, maybe we see a dip from that. That would be some really great news. We should look for that. But what I'm trying to express to you is we haven't exhausted the expected results from what we've already done. And for the biggest, most aggressive results, the most aggressive actions, we haven't even got to where we would expect results. So don't get frustrated that what we've done isn't helping yet. It's not time for it to be helping yet. I'm going to show you why you shouldn't try to make too serious of a prediction with this data. I've been talking all this time about how smooth that slope is on the log graph, how, that line, I keep, and you just look at it and it looks like a line. But what I've done here is I've taken the slope at each point. I actually used a 3 data point calculation for getting the slope. I used one of the techniques I used when I was doing numeric research in quantum mechanics. So yeah, I've kind of done this before. But what we see is this green line is the average. This is what our brain presents us with. We look at that line that looks so smooth to us, and we feel like we can make a projection. The problem is that line's actually kind of all over the place. I mean, the average is about 0.28, but here we're down almost to 2. Here we're at 1.8 if I remember correctly. And here we're up close to, I think it was 3.7 or 3.8. So we are all over the place. And what you see for this in terms of projections is radically different than what you would see for this as a projection. And understanding that difference is actually very important. So let me show you that. This screen has some bad looking news in it, but it actually has some good news hidden inside of it. So what I've done here is I took the data I was just showing you, the noisy data, and I excluded the best 2 points and the worst 2 points to sort of moderate it a little bit. So we're mostly looking at the mainstream data. And even looking at the mainstream data, if we look at what our projections would be if we only tried to project 6 days in the future, not a month, certainly not the rest of this year, anything like that, just the next 6 days. We see some radical differences. This bottom line projects, looks like around 280,000 in the US. Now, I'm sorry if that frightens you, and there is a chance we'll do better than that, but if you look at the curve we were looking at, each night, you know, these are the sort of data points I'm saying shouldn't shock you. That's where we end up. Now, don't really, this is a dangerous thing to do. Don't project this far. The point to this video is so that you understand generally how this curve is shaped here at the beginning. A little while later, it actually starts curving back down as various other inputs take effect on the population of the infected. This green line is the middle of the road, and this top line is the high estimate, which is a little over 500,000. But what I really want you to pay attention to is this top line versus the bottom line. You are not quite looking at a factor of 2 difference. The bottom line's about 3/5 the top line. So you can be radically different, and this is even after excluding the data that diverged more. But I told you there was some good news hidden in here too. The good news is you get this much difference over time just in the noise. So what I'm trying to say is if we improve our behavior just a little, not radically, but if we do well enough that we're only looking at the kind of difference you would see due to noise, you end up with almost a factor of 2 difference over time. So I want you to think about that, because if you do your best, if we each do our best to contain this, then in the course of merely 6 days, you could be looking at a factor of, let's call it a factor of 2 over a week. In a week, you can make a factor of 2 difference. That means that in 14 days, you could make a factor of 4 difference. In a month, you could actually make a factor of 16 difference. The impact of how we behave right now is huge. And this is what they're talking about with flattening the curve. So after all of that, am I still going to hazard a guess? Yes, of course I am. I'm guessing that on March 26th, we're going to see about a 32% increase over March 25th, bringing us to 85,992. Am I right? But now, you know, I don't. My point isn't that that's going to be the number, and it's certainly not that people should be trying to make forecasts, particularly further out. I mean, if I'm going to be off on just one day, imagine how off I would be for a week. But the point I'm trying to make is that when we hear that number, it isn't shocking, and we have some manner of understanding what's going on and can anticipate what to expect, at least a bit.
I know that wasn't all good news, but I told you from the beginning I wasn't going to try to turn bad news into good news. And I also appreciate that for some of you it wasn't news at all. For some of you it was just 8th grade math, but not everyone paid attention in 8th grade math, and even those of us who did, it's been a long time. I want to end by recapturing this a different way. We all know how important it is to get the very best interest rates on our house we can. And the reason for that is compound interest makes a small difference in interest rate incredibly expensive over the years. Just as you pay attention to an interest rate on a credit card or an auto loan or a home mortgage, this is why you pay attention to trying to not spread the infection to others or trying not to become infected yourself. Fundamentally, when they're talking about flattening the curve, they're talking about lowering the interest rate. It's the same mechanism, just in a different context. So do your very best to lower the interest rate, decrease the long-term cost to our society. And if you have any technical questions for me or want me to attempt to explain other related data, let me know. I'll be happy to see what I can do, though I will admit I'm not the mathematician I once was. Be safe, take care of your neighbors, take care of your family. We can get through this.
So here we are back at the log chart, and I'm recording this 6 days later than I recorded the original. So we have some more data. Last time our data ended on the 25th, and I took a guess about the 26th. And now we have some more data even after that. And if I put off making this video for about another hour, I could have the data for April 1st. So let's look at the 10 to 14 day stick again with the updated data. I did have to adjust this guy because the graph got wider, and to make it fit, it changed the shape a little, but I've tried to be honest. I tried to be as honest as I can. And we see that after Trump's travel ban, 10 to 14 days later, we don't really see any difference. When you look at the California shelter in place and you look 10 to 14 days later, look what's happened. And even before I added that, we saw this curve here. But once you put that 10 to 14 day stick in, it really makes it apparent how much that curve is really changing. And then if we go back and we get to the point that we're talking about 1 in 3 citizens being sheltered in place by March 23rd, and we add the 10 to 14 day stick for that, we can see that this curve is going to fall well short of the original projection based off this slope here. The problem is, while the log chart does a good job of letting us predict where it's going, it hides from us the magnitude of impact. this chart in an attempt to help you understand the magnitude of impact from that subtle change in slope on the log chart on the CV19 data. This orange line is a plot of the slope of the log chart. And you can see it's a little choppy, but we can see a general trend here. It's going up to around, what is that, about the 19th. And then it's been choppy, but continuing to trend down. And that matches with the curve we were just looking at on the log chart. It continues up, but it's continuing up less quickly. So this is slope. This is a measurement of how much it goes up per day. This red line represents the average, but only of that slope, but only between March 10th and March 17th. The green is for between the 17th and 24th, and the blue is for between the 24th and 31st. So if we look at the red line means that we were increasing the number of infected by 31.7% per day. When we were increasing along the green line, that was 35.7% per day. And finally, our blue line is just 18.7% per day. If we look at those numbers for a week, we see a dramatic difference. But I wanted to show it to you in terms of absolute numbers. So what I did is I took the number of infected that we had as of March 31st. And I applied these percentages to it just for the week to calculate what we would end up with on March 7th. Now, reminder, these first two numbers I'm going to show you, we already have really good reason to think we're going to be under that. And the reason is we're already down to the blue line, and the trend of the yellow line is we're continuing down even quicker. But if we look at had we continued as we were rate-wise between March 10th and March 17th, but it applied it to the data for yesterday, we would end up with 1.2 million infected a week from now. If we do the same thing for the 35.7% increase per day, it's 1.5 million. And finally, with the blue line, it's 600,000, a little under 600,000. Now, I realize just looking at numbers, looking at these charts, isn't that exciting for most people. I get this is dry. But you should be excited by that last number. I'm sorry, you should. The reason is what I'm saying is because of how we've changed that line. Just in the last week, how we've seen it change in the last week, represents 600,000 fewer people getting ill. And if you assume that just 1% die, we've saved 6,000 lives just with the subtle bend in that curve. Was it social distancing? Was it something else? I'm not completely sure. Is it causation or correlation? I don't know. But what I do know is if we can continue doing what we're doing, if we can continue to try to spread this disease as slowly as possible, we have every reason to think we can save lives. We're seeing that in the data. I realized 24 hours ago, you heard our president and his chief medical officers explaining how many people were going to get sick and how many people were going to die. And I'm not taking any of that away. That's all that still likely true. That's not what I'm trying to tell you. All I'm trying to tell you is important trend lines have changed and they're going to make an impact. Please keep up the good work.